A quick art montage is shown on screen. Screen Reads, at home with the DIA, presents Behind the Scene through her eyes. Frida Giblin, a slideshow, and an American Sign Language interpreter appear on screen.
Hi, my name is Frida Giblin. I'm an interpretive program volunteer at the Detroit Institute of Arts. I'm delighted to be here with you today to talk about the women artists in the DIA collection. We're very happy to have a number of very well-known women who have, through the centuries, made some magnificent art. Women had a difficult time being professional artists because frequently they couldn't go to the same art schools that men could go to. They weren't allowed to go out on their own. They were considered not bright enough, not strong enough to work as an artist. So these women had to overcome considerable obstacles to do what they did.
New slide shows the first painting for discussion.
The earliest piece that we have by a female artist is Judith and Her Manservant with the head of Holofernes. This was done in around 1624 by the Italian artist Artemisia Gentileschi. And Artemisia Gentileschi was a fabulous artist who was the daughter of an artist who, and so she received art lessons and she had a private tutor. Here she shows us Judith in a dramatic setting and her maidservant. What's the story? This comes from a story from the Old Testament or the Apocrypha, where Judith, who is an Israelite widow, hears that the Assyrians are coming with General Holofernes to lay siege to their land. She and her maidservant go into the tent of Holofernes. They ply him with wine. He gets drunk. She takes this sword and lops off his head. And here is a dramatic moment. Do they hear somebody coming? Will they be found? The maid is in the midst of putting Holofernes' head into this bag. And it turns out well because they are able to get away. And the next day, when the soldiers find that Holofernes is dead, they leave the town alone. Judith becomes the heroine. Artemisia did a number of these paintings, and this is probably her finest work. We have the painting on loan, but next year we will have an exhibit of Artemisia Gentileschi. By the way, she uses certain very theatrical features. There's this theatrical lighting, very dramatic. This is a huge painting. She leaves her signature. The light on her face shows as a crescent, and Artemis was the goddess of the moon, and so this crescent moon on Judith's face tells us that this was painted by Artemisia Gentileschi.
New slide shows an embroidered piece.
In the 1600s, 1700s, if you were an English lady, you probably learned how to embroider. Now, most women learned how to embroider. The wealthier women would learn some of the fancier stitches. This is a cavalier and lady um, probably done by a woman. The women had pattern books they could use to that would showed animals like this parrot over here, or this tiger, or excuse me, leopard, or this deer, or turtle, or fish. So they were able to make things that were a little bit more complex with their stitches. Men were able to join a worshipful society of broiderers, and they would make things for the royalty, but women were not allowed to do that.
New slide shows a painting of flowers in a vase.
Rachel Royce was a Dutch painter during the Dutch Golden Age. The Dutch Golden Age, the 1600s, 1700s, was when the Dutch East India Company had a lot of ships bringing silks and teas and porcelain from Asia. So there was a lot of trade going on. And she does this piece of flowers that bloom during different times of the year. She was such a good painter that she could draw from different times of the year. This is a story that she is telling. It's called a memento mori, memento-mori, which means that it's it might be a memento of somebody who has died. This tells us that life is short. And while there are flowers that are in full bloom or about to bloom, there are others that are in the midst of dying and withering, and there are insects that are eating at the flowers. So life is short, and the Dutch Calvinists urged the people of the land to not waste your time doing things that were going to be counterproductive. Do good things.
New slide shows a sepia-toned photograph, 1874.
Julia Margaret Cameron was about 48 years old, and she had grown children when her daughter gave her a camera and said, "Here, Mother, you may find some fun in doing this." And she loved it. She took up the camera when it was fairly new, and she did portraits that were a little bit different from the types of portraits that other people did. Enid is from the story of the Knights of the Round Table, and it comes to us from Alfred Lord Tennyson's book, The Isles of the King. Lord Tennyson had asked her to photograph for his book, and she did so, but she didn't like the way things turned out. So she ended up publishing her photographs separately. Enid is the story of one of the Knights of the Round Table, Gawain, who is married to Enid. He hears that Sir Lancelot and Lady Guinevere are having an affair, and he thinks Enid, who is a friend of Guinevere's, is unfaithful. He puts her through a lot of trials. So Enid is disconsolate. She's sad. She thinks her husband thinks she's unfaithful. So there's a story behind this photographic portrait.
New slide shows a large format camera.
And this is what some of the cameras looked like at that time.
Another photograph is shown on
and
screen.
This is another piece that the DIA has of Sir John Herschel, who actually gave photography its name. Photos for light graphene for drawing.
New slide shows a new painted scene, 1849.
Lily Martin Spencer painted this during a time when America was going through a lot of difficulty. And she paints scenes of domestic happiness. She was so good at painting that she became the breadwinner of her family. I understand this is her husband, her actual husband, and this might have been the woman who took care of the kids. But what is the woman saying here? They're looking at the babies. This is a happy scene, and she's sort of holding up her hand. Maybe she's saying, hush, don't disturb the children. But the woman is in charge here in the home.
New slide shows two white busts, 1800s.
Edmonia Lewis is in a gallery at the DIA where there are artists of African descent. And this was time before the Emancipation Proclamation. Her mother was Native American. Her father was from the Caribbean, and many people and he was from somebody from the Caribbean who was of African descent. Hiawatha, the Song of Hiawatha, was an epic poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Here is Minnehaha and Hiawatha. Hiawatha is in Native American dress. Minnehaha is in European dress. And they are approximately 10 inches high. You'll notice that the features tend to be European features because that was what was popular then. That was what was taught to the artists. And that was what people would buy. Edmonia Lewis went to college at Oberlin. She studied also in Boston. She spent a lot of time in Rome learning sculpture. She was under 5 feet tall, but very strong because this is marble, and you have to be very strong to carve marble. She lived most of her life in Europe. And she had some of her funding came from her brother who struck gold, so that's why she went to Oberlin. But she also had abolitionists who helped fund her. Plus, she made some sculptures in Boston that sold very well.
New slide shows a man's shirt, about 1880.
The Native American women were expert at sewing, making clothing like this. And this was done by an unknown woman. It's a man's shirt. And the men and women would have different roles to play. The men would would go hunting. And the women would prepare the skins, like the buckskin. They would scrape off the fat and things like that. The men might do some of the painting, but the women would do the beadwork. And here we're seeing a lot of quill work. Women would take quills and they would prepare them. They'd have to be soaked, they needed to be straightened out, and they needed to be sewn onto the buckskin. It would take probably, let me go back. It could take up to a year for a woman to do beadwork on a fancy robe or a shirt for a man. This is hair, could be horse hair, could be human hair. Sometimes they used wool, which would be imported from England. beads would be purchased also.
New slide shows a painting of a woman and a young girl, 1903 to 04.
Mary Cassatt was an artist from Pennsylvania, and as a teenager, she went to the Philadelphia Academy of Art, but women were looked down there, and so she went to Paris to train. Women were not allowed into the studios that were only for men, the training studios. So she went to the Louvre to paint. She sold a lot of her paintings that she made of art objects in the Louvre. And she was able to support herself. She was such a good artist. She met the Impressionists. Edgar Degas was a friend of hers. And she liked to paint women and their children. Now, at this time, women and children, their lives were somewhat unknown from male lives. Men would go out into the world, but what did women and children do? What did their lives look like? Mary Cassatt gave us a good feeling as to what women and children did together. Here, she uses some interesting techniques. Look at the ribbon here. This draws our attention to the little girl's face. Her name was Simone, and she was in a number of Mary Cassatt's paintings. Nowadays, if you take a photograph and there's too much in there, you want to focus on your main subjects, you might crop it. So here you see the chair being cropped, and maybe some of the dress of this woman being cropped like in a photograph. And these may have been techniques that Edgar Degas taught her from photography. He was a painter as well, and we have wonderful works by him at the DIA as well. Mary Cassatt was supported the suffragette movement, and in 1915 she showed 18 paintings, and this was one of them, and that was an exhibition that supported the women's suffragette movement.
New slide shows a painting of an older woman about 1905.
Paula Becker paints this old peasant woman. It's done in Germany, and she preferred to paint peasant women or peasants because they lived a simpler life. This was at a time when great industrialization was taking place in Europe. And in addition to progress in industry, however, there was noise pollution. People were shuttled to live in very crowded places. And so a lot of people were looking at not so much the positive, not just the positive aspects, but some of the negative aspects of industrialization. And Paula Becker and her husband lived in an artist commune, something like the hippie communes of the 1960s in America. She paints this old peasant woman with great reverence. She believed in the simplicity of the peasants, and almost gives a spiritual look by almost a halo surrounding this woman. Her arms are crossed in a way that signifies acceptance. And I'm going to show you another painting.
New slide shows a different painting, 1450.
Arms are crossed, and this is in the Annunciation, where Gabriel tells Mary that she is pregnant with Jesus, and she crosses her arms in acceptance. This is also a painting at the DIA by Fra Angelico.
Back to previous slide.
Another thing to notice, besides the crossed arms and acceptance, is this primrose, which is a flower that is a symbol of youth. And the woman recognizes that her youth is gone, but she's accepting of that.
New slide shows 2 pieces of pottery.
Pueblic Pottery was created here in Detroit by Mary Chase Perry Stratton and her partner Horace Calkins. She developed a lot of these glazes together. They developed the glazes. He was a former dentist. He had a kiln. They called it the Revelation Kiln. She made these fabulous pieces that have this shine, like a silver coin or a copper penny. They really had this look about them that had a metallic look, although the formulas are no longer used because they were toxic. She used things like lead and mercury, although the Pueblic Pottery still exists as a shop, they use a different formula. We have other areas in the DIA, such as the Great Hall, which is right near the American Gallery, where these Pueblic Pottery niches are located, where the tile on the floor is from Pueblic Pottery. Also, we have Pueblic tiles in the Diego Rivera murals, the Diego Rivera room. Plus, they are located at various other places in Detroit and elsewhere in this country.
New slide shows a bronze-looking bust about 1930.
Augusta Savage was an African-American artist who was a sculptor, and she worked during the time of the Harlem Renaissance, which was a period of great activity for African-American artists, in which African-American artists no longer copied what European and many American artists were doing. They were urged to show the culture of their own people. And this piece is probably one of the first of a young African-American boy. We believe it's based on her nephew, who was about 11 or 12 at the time. And he's got this expression that is just like an 11-year-old boy. It's one of boyhood defiance. Gamin is the name of this. Gamin is sort of a French word for street urchin. And so you can imagine him running out on the street, sort of with his friends, having a great time. His cap is sort of, perched in a cocky position. He's boyhood defiance personified. So it's a great piece. And I also have a picture of Augusta Savage and another sculpture that she did. She did some great works of the African-American leaders of the time as well.
New slide shows a photograph.
Margaret Burke White did these Bolshevik babies in the nursery. So it was done in Moscow in 1934. And the factory made armored vehicles. They had a nursery because a lot of women were hired there, and they needed some place to put their babies. So this could be anywhere, right? And each of the children here is doing something. They're drinking, they're looking at us, they're about to eat. And so it's just a delightful piece that she has. She was hired by Fortune magazine. She did a lot of industrial photographs, and the DIA owns this other photograph that I'll show you.
New slide shows another photograph.
During World War II, she was hired by Life magazine. She did some fabulous photos, including those in Germany at concentration camps, which stunned the world.
New slide shows a jar about 1935.
Maria and Julian Martinez did this piece, and it's fairly large. It's about 20 inches across, and maybe it's about 1.5 feet high, this jar. And it is black on black. This fabulous, this beautiful, shiny black glaze on top of pottery, and this matte, M-A-T-T-E, black in the background. And this serpent, which is a creature that's seen in some of the Pueblo cultures of Southwest America, sort of meanders along. It's beautiful. It's sinuous. It's a beautiful piece to look at. They developed this style of black on black, and it has to do with the glazes they used and being very careful with painting glazes over a piece, which I won't go into, but come to the DIA sometime when we're open and you'll find out more about it.
New slide shows a photo of a woman holding her children.
Dorothea Lange took this photograph, which is one of the most famous photographs of all time from America. She did this during the Depression, the Great Depression. And also, this was an era of the Dust Bowl where there wasn't enough rain, there were terrible winds, crops failed, thousands of people were homeless, and they had very little food. The woman that you see here is only 32 years old. She had 7 children, Florence Owens Thompson. Her husband died. While pregnant with her 6th child was when her husband died. She works in the fields. She's making her way to a PEA farm. Unfortunately, there is hail the day before and the crops are ruined. How are people going to eat? Dorothea Lange photographs her at this terrible time in her life. But she publishes it in a San Francisco newspaper, and she tells her publisher about the plight of these people. And so there was a story run, a couple of her photographs were published, and the government shipped 20,000 pounds of food. Unfortunately, Florence Thompson and her kids had left then. She later photographed many of the homeless. She's well known for that. She also photographed Japanese immigrants who were interned during World War II, I think. This is not at the DIA, but that's one of the photographs. But those photographs were taken by the U.S. government and not seen.
New slide shows a clay head about 1960.
The terracotta head that you see here is sort of a life-size piece made out of clay that is painted. It looks like bronze. It is made by Elizabeth Cablet, who's an African-American woman who studied with Diego Rivera. So Diego Rivera is the artist of the murals, which is one of our major galleries at the DIA. And she makes this sculpture of a woman of African descent. Her hair is somewhat textured. Her face is very serene though. It's very strong. She shows a lot of strength in this woman. And there's sort of like a worldly wiseness I find in this sculpture, and I urge you to come take a look and see what you think of it. She may have based this on some of the ancient Mexican sculptures. And I'm going to show you a photograph I found of one, and here are other views of this.
New slide shows a stone figure.
Which is an Olmec. The Olmec culture, which are the ancient Mexicans, made a very, very large stone figures of heads.
New slide shows a photograph, 1970.
Diane Arbus was a photographer who found people who were a little bit different. She might befriend somebody from the circus. She might go to places, or seedy places that people might not go to every day. She went to a dance, and they were crowning two people who did not know each other, the king and queen of the dance. Her husband was an actor who played on the TV series MASH. His name was Allison Ark, and he played the psychiatrist. But she's really known for her realistic photographs and her, her view of things that might be a little bit offbeat or a little bit different. But the DIA has another photograph of hers.
New slide shows a new photograph.
This is from Disneyland, and it's set in it's sort of. And I'll let you think of what this makes you feel, what you think the lights are, and this is just another example of her interesting work.
New slide shows a textured art piece, 1988.
Howardina Pindell, I think she's got an exhibit going on now, but she's in New York, but she is an artist who had a very, very bad car accident, and she started working in different media. So she started making things that were her. This isn't quite a painting. She might use narrow strip weavings in some of these pieces that look like they're slightly hatched. She uses sewn pieces of canvas here. And this is a little bit reminiscent of some of the work done in Western Africa. This title is based upon a tear gas that was used during Vietnam. And so it conjures up things that are done to people who are somewhat innocent. The Vietnamese had this war going on, and tear gas was being used, and also hearing that this is possibly Agent Orange. So if it's Agent Orange, it has to do with people who are using Agent Orange to against the wishes of the people, or tear gas against the wishes of the people who are congregating or not allowed to speak or congregate. So she puts in words here by people who are having things done to them that they had no ability to stop. They're being censored, people who are being shot, people who are questioning, people who are assassinated, killed, or beaten. There are 4 figures in here. Here is the body of a person, and this reminds us of a crime scene. This is meant to remind us of a crime scene because she is talking about victims, and she felt herself to be one as an African-American woman and as a person from a culture that frequently is being put down in ways that they don't want to be. Here's another body, here's another figure, sort of a head, and here's another one over here.
New slide shows a new art piece, 1933.
Doris Salcedo also talks about the dark side of what do people have to put up with. Attribularios is defiant. And she's talking about the defiant people in South America in the 1960s. And people who spoke out against injustices and ordinary citizens being abducted in the middle of the night. What do we have of them so we can remember them? They had shoes. They left shoes behind. And this is some way of giving some homage to those people who spoke up, but then were taken away and disappeared. She puts over these shoes this translucent kind of a thing. You can sort of see through, but very hazy. And this reminds us of flaying, which is a torture where people's skins are removed. And parchment is where animal skin is used to make paper for writing on before we had paper. But it's somewhat translucent. The stitches here are made with surgical suture. So there's a roughness to this that is somewhat disturbing. It's a remembrance, but it's a disturbing remembrance.
New slide shows a vessel, 1994.
Magdalene Odundo is an African artist, and she makes this piece out of, let's see, I think I believe it's made out of clay, because she traveled to San Ildefonso. Remember when we saw that jar with the snake undulating, that figure? So she traveled to that place to observe the making of blackware vessels, and this is a blackware vessel. She is combining a couple of cultures, because although she uses the San Ildefonso medium of pottery, she's also depicting a woman, and I'm going to show that. Here's a woman's head, and there is a headdress, a very beautiful and elegant headdress that the Mangbetu people, Mangbetu people of the Congo were used to use. They would bind their hair, their skull, to change its shape, and that was a symbol of beauty. The artist here is interested in women's bodies and the elaborate things that we do for fashion and style.
New slide shows a photograph of hands, 1996.
Shireen Nishat is a photographer and a conceptual artist. She came here from Iran in the early 1970s to study, but then could not go back to Iran because it was after the Shah was deposed. She has this photograph from a series that she did called Women of Allah. And she shows us this photograph that has been touched up by other artists whom she had commissioned to make these flower-like, henna-like objects that are somewhat reminiscent of the Middle East and some of the decoratives images that they use there, some of the henna they used for creating beauty in the Middle East and other cultures. And what she's offering us is sort of another view of women. What are women like in Iran? now that the Islamic Revolution has taken place. This is just a glimpse into that new world.
New slide shows a game-inspired art piece, 1997.
Mad Elga by Jane Hammond is a piece that's based upon the board game Snakes and Ladders. Shoots and Ladders. I think it's called Snakes and Ladders in Mexico. She is an artist who, she had a lot of background in film, video, photography, performance art, installation art. She sort of puts it all together. And she's interested in looking at language. As you can see, there's a lot of writing done here. Language and art. How does that affect us in our daily lives? And she finds pieces that she will embed or draw from like flea markets and things like that. So if you take a look at some of these, that looks like a mask we might be wearing nowadays, right? Glasses, figures, unusual looking things. So she'll collect these odd images, and together she sort of builds a different kind of meaning in these paintings that are also part of the game of life, maybe. She got the name Mad Elga from somebody who suggested the title of the poem.
New slide shows a sculpture, 2005.
Blood, Sweat, and Tears is a life-size sculpture by the noted African-American artist Allison Ark. This was a time when she had just lost her father, who was an art historian or art conservationist. Her mother is Betty Czar, the well-known artist as well. She is crying through just about every pore in her body. The figure underneath is made of wood. She has copper sheets. These are bronze tears. She has put them together with these bronze nails. It's sort of a story of, she's getting older, she's beyond her childbearing years, she's lost her father. It's a difficult time of life. So she sort of asks us to think about our lives and what is it that maybe we're going through that's difficult and that we've lost. She puts this figure on a piece of tin that comes from the ceiling. Now, in the early 1900s, there were a lot of places where people would congregate and they would have tin ceilings. She collected these in New York. She says that these pieces of tin have heard everything. They've been there. They've witnessed a lot, just like this figure.
New slide shows a photograph, 2009.
Marina Abramovic is one of the world's great performance artists. This is from a video that is about 11 minutes long. She is holding this very full bucket of milk or pot of milk, and she is in an outfit that may look like a nun, and she is actually in an old Carthusian nun's residence that is in Spain. This place housed about 8,000 orphans who were orphaned during the Franco era in Spain. And milk is a reminder of maternal substance, and it's how do you feed many children? Milk is one of the major things that they need. If you've seen this video, there's a tenseness about this because holding this is very difficult. You're holding it for a long period is difficult, and towards the end, it begins to drip a little along the sides. So, milk symbolizes the human maternal body. The woman holding the milk symbolizes the endurance of women and the difficulties that they put up with.
Final slide says thank you.
That is the story of women artists at the DIA. We have many others. We invite you to come. The DIA is open during this COVID pandemic. You have to go online to register for the date and time you want to come visit. And then you'll be given a code number, so you can come in at that time. When you come in, they will take your temperature. They'll make sure you wear a mask. And the galleries are laid out so that you can only go in one direction. That's so you don't run into people. And the DIA has done an excellent job of having their staff help direct people as well as maintain
Video
distance.
ends.